Hey friends, I'm Maxwell Freud, a queer Minneapolis-based game designer and the host of Hatch This Way, a limited audio series where I chat with other queer folks in the tabletop industry to learn all about who they are and how they contribute to the hobby by being their authentic selves. Today I'm chatting with Omari Akil. Omari, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
First, very important question. How do you identify? What are all the magical things that make up Omari?
I mean, it was an interesting kind of process for me figuring out what those were. But where I kind of feel the most comfortable now is demi. And almost that in and of itself kind of covers everything. A lot of my sort of gender identification is, as a demi man, that kind of makes the most sense to me, and demisexual in a lot of ways makes sense to me too. So it's where I feel the most comfortable, and it's super efficient to say. So I'm going with it.
So before we delve into kind of the journey of getting there, break down for us what it means to be demi. What does that mean?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of gender, the way that I've seen it described, it is just outside of the norm of what you would think for whatever it is. So for me, identifying as a demi-man, the sort of masculine is where I feel kind of present in just my identity most of the time, but there's a lot of feminine aspects to it. And so that seems to fit the most there. And the term demisexual means more so that the way that I find connection and sexual romantic attraction to people is more about sort of other qualities of the person. Intelligence, some describe it that way, some describe it as just sort of more general qualities. And my attraction is more based on that. But I also think that I've been generally more attracted to women than men. So there's a imbalance there, but it's not half and half. It's not, I don't know exactly what it is. So it feels also connected into my gender, which is demi man, in that way too.
And then I can see it, but they can't. So what pronouns do you use?
Oh, I use he and they.
So how do you feel? Do you have to explain that super often, even to people in the queer community, or do you think it's like relatively well known in your circle, or what's that kind of? Like?
I mean, it's interesting. I don't often explain it, which I feel like is a good thing in general. I think the people that I'm around who see it sort of understand that it's probably a different definition from, maybe something they've seen before, but they understand that it's different and that it's unique. And so, maybe it'll come up in conversation and we'll talk about it a little bit. But it's never like an outright question. It probably just like, makes people curious. And then if it comes out, it comes out. But I think people are comfortable with the different terms existing, at least in my circles. So yeah, it's never like a thing to be questioned on immediately.
Yeah, one thing that I've realized doing this is that I haven't had a lot of conversations with my friends of different identities because I'm just like, oh, we're queer. And that's like pretty much all I need to know is that we're not straight and we're family. And I'm like, that's all I need to know about you really to connect with you as a human being. So I still think these conversations are important though. It's just, I think in a casual context when I'm hanging out with friends, I don't, I'm not like questioning it or anything, but yeah, I have learned that people do like, do you appreciate talking about it? Like, do you like having the opportunity to talk about it if people do bring it up?
I do. And most often, especially if it's people who like aren't familiar with the term, it ends up, me describing it ends up teaching them something, or at least pushing them in a direction that they weren't thinking about, in terms of like what a gender identification can be or what a sexual identification can be. It's like at least making them think about it in a slightly different way, or at least I try to describe it in a way where that's the case too, because often like that's what you just need to do to have somebody have a real understanding of your perspective, is try to give a real sense of what it is.
Now that we kind of discovered or discussed what that means, talk to me about how you kind of arrived at that identity. Like, what has that path been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not smooth. It was only something I either considered questioning maybe 6 years ago, where it was like, well, there's something different. And that was,
Mm.
I had already started exploring polyamory and non-monogamy. And that gave me the opportunity to ask some of these other questions. And so it was kind of through that process I was able to even just consider what it's like to being attracted to a lot of different varieties of people in a lot of different ways. Um, it made me re-engage friendship in a way that I hadn't, just understanding how friendships can look across different sort of like genders and combinations and sexualities, and how those things interplay. Because even in relationships that aren't romantic, those things still come into play at some point. And it's just interesting. It's a fun interplay, and talking about it is, I think, a part of that, where you get to
Mm.
discover things and learn things about people.
What was it like? I mean, did you know or have a sense, even like at a super young age, like, I don't know, single digits, that that you were different, that, maybe it wasn't just this binary thing that we're usually fed?
Yeah. I want to say the answer is yes, but I had no concept of the words for it at all.
Mm.
What I feel like I ran into at a very young age, and actually this is a ridiculous thing, but I have a toy here that I had as a child. I don't know, maybe single digits. I'm gonna say potentially single digits. Um, and it was a girl's toy. I think it was marketed as a girl toy. It's the Littlest Play Shop series. It's a little puppy. It's adorable.
I'm very familiar.
Yeah. So I think buying one of these as a kid, or wanting one of these as a kid, when it was sort of marketed as a girl's toy, was like one of my first, like, I think, thoughts of, does this fit me? Like, why do I want it? And thinking about it that way, I don't have a lot of, I don't remember how it sort of played out. I kind of remember it being uncomfortable, and not knowing what to do with that. But that was almost the gist of it, for that I can remember, at least until very later in life.
That's so interesting. I feel like at a similar age, so I had both like the Mighty Max toys, and then there was like a was it Polly? Was it? I don't think it was
Polly
literally
Pocket.
Polly Pocket. It might have
Okay.
been Polly Pocket, but I liked both, and I probably liked the Polly Pockets a little bit more. And like the fact that my parents were still like, we had no idea. I was like, really? Like, but I also remember like getting those toys and not thinking it was a huge deal, and then at some point, somebody let me know, or like something shifted in my head where I was like, oh no, that's something's wrong here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that something like that must have happened. Like, I don't remember any of my toys going in that direction ever again. I'm, I can't be sure, but it certainly felt different, I think, than anything else I was doing at that age.
Where did you grow up, by the way?
In New Orleans. Yeah,
Oh
I
my.
was I was I was born, and yeah, grew up there and left when I was basically 17, left for college, and haven't really lived there since, which is interesting because all my family does.
I've been to New Orleans once, and it was a really cool place. Like, it's the coolest town. What was it like growing up there? It seems like it'd be a pretty progressive town, I would assume, but I know there's also like those smaller, suburbs around it that maybe aren't the same as that's how it is in the Midwest. You have like the very progressive cities, and then like these very conservative cities and towns around the big cities. That's very Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up there. It was very progressive, and I think for most of my life there was a lot that was visible to me, just like in terms of people who were very different. Um, I I don't know exactly how this happened, but it feels like it was always framed like in my sort of bubble, like that was framed as something that was just like not accessible to me. Like it was always, it was part of the sort of party environment and party culture. It didn't
Mm.
feel like just a normal thing. I think that if it always felt like it was just outside of what was possible for me. So just a little bit out of reach. And maybe that was because I was a kid. They probably warned me against that stuff. And anything in the French Quarter or on Bourbon Street, just to steer me away. But yeah, it felt like there was just something kind of stopping me from engaging with any of it. Um, so it is kind of sad that I left there not feeling connected with the diversity that was there in that way.
So did you did you have to come out to your family at some point?
I mean, not exactly. My just like being far away, living in North Carolina now, has changed some of the ways that I interact with my family, and my coming out wasn't necessarily about like my gender identity or my sexual identity, but I did sort of have a coming out about my relationship identity, like having two very serious partners and
Mm.
needing my family to understand that that is a part of who I am. um, that part was felt important, to sort of come out. And it didn't feel like a coming out either. It felt like a honest, like, this is the situation now, and I like want you to be present and a part of it. So how do we make that work, really? Which is, I think, just a sign that I have a really good relationship with my parents, and I was able to. It was hard. I wasn't looking forward to that conversation, but it felt like I could do it, and so I did it, and it was fine.
What was your family like? What is your family like, I guess?
I mean, they're pretty awesome. Yeah, and they're party people too. So like they enjoy having a good time. Like when I would go home and hang out with my family, like we would go to jazz clubs, we would go hear music, we would go out and eat beignets late at night. Like it was a good time. But they are lovely. Yeah, both my parents just like got married really young and have been together like 50 something years. Yeah, I have a brother and a sister. They have both have families, and they're both super awesome. My brother's an artist. My sister's now a farmer who's done everything on earth, from engineering to teaching and everything in between. Yeah, they're overall like lovely people. And if I think if I really had an inkling that I was really different in some way, like growing up, they would have readily sort of embraced that. Because I think all my siblings have gone through things where they needed
Oh.
support, and they got it. So yeah, they're pretty cool.
It's been a very common theme. I like this is the seventh interview I've done, and it seems that everyone has very supportive families, which I'm hoping is because of like we're all relatively in the same age like range, I think. And I think it's more of I hope a sign of the times of where things are shifting to. Whereas I think if I had done the same thing, let's say 10 years ago, I doubt that I would have as many consistent people saying my family was just super supportive,
Hmm.
all the way. They were super, like, they still are supportive of respecting my pronouns and how I identify and just embracing my partner or partners. I mean, that's what I'm hearing now. So I I think that's really cool. I think it's important for people to see that too. Like it's not I don't think the story that you hear normally today is it was really hard, life was really hard. I was, it's not getting a lot of sob stories, which I think is what people assume. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know, like, why is it so hard for us to like talk about it to our families? I think it's because we assume the worst, because that's kind of at some point was ingrained in us somehow. It comes from somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, I think realistically, we saw stories and movies and read books about the ways that it went horribly, and
Mm,
I feel like that was a growing pain of society being more accepting, where those stories had to come out. I hope you're
mm.
right that it is just in general getting better. I don't know. Yeah, at least with polyamory, I don't know if that conversation would have went well with my parents 10 years ago as well as it did now. Things are changing, and I mean they're paying attention, I assume.
So, have you run into any like I don't know, challenges or struggles? Let's say like in the dating scene when you're trying to like meet people or introduce yourself or explore. Like, have you run into any challenges or I don't know, what's it been like?
I mean, it's been a little bit challenging. And I think most often is when I'm kind of in situations with more masculine identifying people, because I don't
Mm,
have such a good understanding of like how my sexual orientation works in that way. It's like I don't often have the words to really kind of describe that, or engage with it in the same way. It's like, so it's more discovery, and sometimes it feels harder to kind of communicate that. Like I don't know how to approach it when I'm so uncertain sometimes. And but it's like such an important thing to me to have an experience. So it's like, how do you kind of work through that effectively? Because that has to be part of the conversation at some point.
let's go ahead and shift into like the board game side of things
Yeah.
because yeah, that's what we're here also for. Talk to me about where do you see yourself in the industry or in the tabletop hobby?
Now or a week from now, because those might be very different questions.
Oh, I mean, like in general, like where, as far as like as representation goes, like where do you see yourself, or do you see yourself represented, or
I mean, it's an interesting question now for me to answer, because I think when I first got in the industry, like 4 years ago, almost, I think now, um, I didn't see myself represented in terms of my blackness. I didn't see it myself represented in terms of my queerness. So I was a little bit lost in that way. And I was excited to be there. It was new, it was interesting, but I was a little bit kind of off. But I found great people. Who ultimately led me to all of the fantastic people of color and queer people in the industry. And now it feels like I've made sort of a bubble of all of those people. So I'm surrounded by that, and it's amazing. But it does feel still like there's a large chunk of the industry that is a little bit resistant to sort of the explosion of content creators who are just so different from what they're used to. So yeah, there's a little bit of fight there, I think, still to be had, but largely, I think most of us are feeling like we're in good company, which is nice.
talk to me a little bit about what that was like what got you into the hobby? Where'd that come from?
It was kind of just on a whim. I mean, the real story is I was searching for community. It was just I had gotten to a point in my life where, friends, situations, breakups, like I had to make some tough choices, and I needed to reestablish myself a community. And I looked for my favorite things: music, dancing, and games. And I found a tabletop group that met every week, and I went there. It was also very white and very not queer at the time, but that actually changed over time in that group, which was awesome. But they met every week, and just we played so many games in the first few months of me being there. I just like fell in love. I couldn't not play board games after that.
Were you used to kind of being like the person of color in a group, or was that like a new experience of walking into or putting yourself out there like, hey, I'm going to join this group of predominantly white people and it's going to be great?
I mean, the answer is yes, but it just happens to be, the things that I choose to go in and the place and the region where I decide to go into it. Yeah, from tech at IBM to some of the chosen hobbies, board games. I did blues dancing for a while, which is oddly white considering the roots of the dance. So it happens more often than not. It has seemed, but I do also have really like strong ties to the Black community in a bunch of different ways too. So, but I have to make sure that that is the case because all of my hobbies and stuff are just not quite as diverse as I would like them to be.
Yeah, talk to me about what you've been doing and what that journey has been like to kind of build that community around you. And I don't know, can you just like expand on why that's important and how it? I want to know more about how it formed and like how you went about finding the good people and bringing them towards you.
Oh wow! When I first went to my first board game convention, that was probably the thing. The people who, especially because I went out there, the first thing I showed anyone was Rap Gods. And there were some people just amongst folks who approached me who were so excited for what I was doing and in a very different way. Like, there's one thing just to be excited that, like, there's a hip hop game. That's one thing. But, like, they were excited that someone was bringing a hip hop game, like, bringing their culture, putting all that into a game. And they wanted to see it come to life. And it only took me a few conventions. I had met like 4 or 5 people who were solid, and they just really like got me connected and got me hooked into the industry in the best way. And yeah, it felt very lucky at the time. But it seems like the industry and the people who are in it now, at least, we all kind of know how hard it is to start. And so we're all sort of doing that and helping out and pointing people in the right direction when they come in. And I've been doing that lately. So I feel like that's just common across the people who are different, who want to see more of that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that was somewhat similar where I went to Gen Con, was my first big convention of pretty much anything. And I was like, oh, I don't like, despite the number of like ally and gamer badges that I saw, I was like, I still don't see myself in games really. Like, I didn't see anything in the giant convention hall floor that said like, oh, like this is me in a game. Like, I enjoy games, but yeah, I don't know. I was just like wanting for something. And I also had this weird like microaggression interaction that was not intended to be a microaggression, but very much was. In that, I mean, so basically, I demoed a game and the woman was explaining it to me, and she's like, "Oh, and there's some items that can only be equipped by women because it's like a bikini, and that'd be uncomfortable for a man to wear." And I was like, "What?" And then she's like, "Oh, it's fine. We also have some items that can only be equipped by men." And I'm like, "That's not better.
Yeah.
You didn't solve the problem by doing that."
No. That is strange.
I was just like, look, if you're here and you're making this thing and you're peddling your wares and perpetuating that, I don't think it was meant to be homophobic, but I'm like, this is homophobic. Like, I'm not comfortable with this game. So I was like, I have enough transferable skills. I can just do this, and I can try and, while doing that, shed a light onto the queer people in the industry and like try and be a beacon for that. I just want to see more queer creators, honestly, making board games and being part of the decision process. And what I find really interesting is I've play tested a lot of designs from queer people, but I have not seen a lot of those designers' names on published games, or like I just don't see a lot of them out in the wild. So I'm wondering like what the barrier is between all these amazing queer designers that I know are out there trying stuff out, but they're just not getting into stores or out of into publishers' hands. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely more now than it used to be, which is nice. But there are some barriers. Sure, I am sure there's still some barriers that are getting in the way, especially as just like higher up decision making. Like it's absolutely needed there. I hope it's happening. I know there's some organizations in the industry that are shifting and have shifted leadership recently. So hoping it's getting better.
talk to me a little bit about what you're doing in the industry. So you mentioned you have a game called Rap Gods.
Yeah.
Talk to me about all the other cool things that you're doing, or expand on that as well.
um, I mean it's a lot of cool things. Its process is slow for a lot of it, but it's a lot of cool things. Yeah, so Rap Gods is going to be reprinted. We're still working on that. It's a lot of issues these last couple years, obviously getting anything made. And yeah, we're on the probably maybe worse end of that. Who knows? We'll find out. And so yeah, that project is delayed, but along with that, we also have Hoop Gods coming, which I'm very excited to finally be getting out. It's a street basketball board game, head to head. We're trying to really create that competitive atmosphere on the table. It's a real-time dice rolling game with a cool energy reservoir mechanic that you have to keep refilling your energy. It's fun. So those are great. I also have Critical Care, which is a game that I co-designed about being doctors in the ICU. That is also coming out later this year, hopefully. And it will, I think it just, it to me represents a whole lot of interesting things happening in the industry right now. Just with the types of games that we make and how deep we can go into certain things and create games. And I worked with a actual ICU doctor on it, so it has so much real medical information just like packed into it. It's exciting almost purely for that, but we also made a fun game out of that. So I'm like projects like that just I'm hoping are going to be the new norm, where we just get deep dives into worlds that we didn't think we could go to in games. And then I have the Dark Quarter, which is a project I worked on as a cultural consultant, and I'm doing some writing for it. It's a dark, mature horror games, fantasy game set in New Orleans, which was outrageous for me to conceptualize and think about and try to be a part of and help with that world, being someone who lived there. But it was a lot of fun. So yeah, that'll be out later next year. And then I have a secret project that I'm going to tell you about.
Oh my.
I just released the first mixtape in this project that I'm calling the Tabletop Rap Game Project, where really the goal is to combine. This is really just like the things that I want to do and the things that I love, which is music and games, and figure out interesting ways to combine them. And so the first iteration of that is a combination mixtape of songs and games. So I'm basically releasing these mixtapes, and people can subscribe to download them, and they're going to combine songs and games. The first one is just me, but I'm looking to grow it. I'm looking to have other designers contribute both songs and games to this project and make it grow. And so, yeah, this is, I don't know, it feels like a big thing. It feels very personal because just of the content and like the way that I'm going about it. So I'm just really excited to start this and hopefully have the support I need to keep doing it.
Oh my god. I feel like that's gonna be so hot. It's like so niche, but I could see it going really big because they're like, damn, this is a niche thing and everyone needs to hear this one niche thing.
That's what I'm counting on, I guess. I just it was like it felt so necessary for me to just go very specific and do this thing. So here I am.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome. Yeah, and I can see a picture of this awesome album. It's legit. Cool. So now that we heard about your awesome project, talk to me about what are some of your favorite games that maybe that got you into it, your like tried and true favorites, or if it's helpful, what are games that you recommend to people who are looking to get into the hobby that you're like, you got to try this?
Yeah, man, I really like Eclipse is it I mean, I always go back to it probably when I have to tell people what my favorite game is. It goes back and forth between a couple. But it ends up being Eclipse. It's not a game that I would recommend to anybody just starting out. It is a game that takes 45 minutes to an hour per player, so you're going to be there for a while. But it's a space exploration game. It has exactly the things that I like in games, which is a lot of dice rolling for no reason at all, um, and something and getting to like craft something, and it lets you create all of your ships of different sizes. You get to like equip them out with different weapons and shields and stuff. And yeah, the combination of those two things just makes me love that game a lot. But when I'm recommending games to people, I generally recommend, there's a few that are go-tos. One is number 9. It's
Mm.
a game that is so easy to start playing, that it just works. You just open the box and take the cards out, shuffle them, and you're playing the game. And I feel like a lot of the times the setup is such a huge barrier to entry. That's one that I often recommend. But there's a few other good games. I love to tell people about games like Arch Ravels, games that are just about very different themes that you don't see. Somebody's like, whoa, there's a knitting game. I'm like, yeah, of course there's a knitting game. I make it seem like there's a game for everything, right? Just to hopefully pique their interest and make them start looking for things they might be interested in games. But yeah, those are just a few kind of in things that just have grabbed me lately.
What's your sense, or like, what are you seeing in the industry that gives you hope, or what do you want to see in terms of games, designers, I don't know, community?
The thing that I see a little bit of and I really want to see more of, I think we're just starting to see bigger worlds get created in board games. I think we're at the point now where people are starting to expand on their series, and and new things, not IPs, but like Tidal Blades is a good example of a game that is really trying to build an entire world and expand that world out. We've seen it with a few titles, a few games kind of do that in terms of the gameplay. But I'm also wanting to see a lot more in terms of like narrative and story. I feel like Pandemic, the Legacy series, is a good example. Like they're starting to build out a bigger world, and so I'm excited to really see how far, like what's going to be, in 20 years from now, the Super Mario level board game that like leveled up from board game to something crazy, like so yeah, I think the future is bright for a lot of creators who are getting into it right now also, or who have been doing it for a little while now, because the industry is growing so big. So even more reason to just encourage like more people of color, more queer artists and designers to get into it. It's got some issues, but it's lovely people. There's a really nice community now that's growing, and yeah, hopefully the industry takes care of its creators. That's the second piece, and that's being worked on too.
Expand on that just a little bit more in terms of like payment specifically, or
Yeah, I mean the industry is just, unfortunately, it's a really tight just financial industry to be
mm,
able to operate in board games. Until you're doing crazy volume, it's incredibly hard. Effectively, just a lot of the work that gets done in small to medium range companies gets done more or less for free. It's you're getting paid less than you can or less than you should be in a lot of cases. Sometimes you're doing the work, you're part of a team, just hoping that the thing is successful. So it ends up being there's just a lot of upfront work often that happens in game design too. Often it's a lot of upfront work on design. Sometimes a check, a little bit of royalties, but not that much. It doesn't cover all the time that was put into it necessarily. So it's just a little bit of an imbalance there, and it just creates really awkward situations and hard decisions for folks all across the industry until you're doing crazy volume and you can afford to make everything work the way that it's supposed to.
yeah, I don't know if I've talked about it on this podcast yet, but I think there's like this disconnect because people play a game and they have like such a strong like emotional experience with it, or they have like this amazing time, or they feel like it's everywhere and they feel like, oh, this must be a great market, or they see numbers of the board game industry being like a multi-billion-dollar business, like it's growing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to your point, a lot of that comes from mass market games, which are games like Don't Step in the Poop. Like we're in like a very niche the hobby market, the hobby board game market,
Yeah.
which isn't exactly the Milton Bradley market, who is how many different monopolies can we wrap and sell?
Mm-hmm.
Because they probably make Monopoly games now for what, 5 cents, and then they put a different theme and sell it for whatever people want
It
to
has to be
pay
ridiculously
for.
cheap for them to manufacture.
And they just put a different sticker on the board and they sell it.
Yeah.
Like that's a great I don't know, commercial model, but I think for a lot of designers like us, where we want a little more meat to the games, we want some more strategic decision making going on, we want to get a little more invested, and yeah, that takes more design time than just putting a different sticker on a
Mm-hmm.
board. And yeah, we're not printing in the volumes of millions of copies. We're printing in
Yeah.
a couple thousands, and that's successful. If we make negative money, we're doing great.
Kind of, sort of. That's how it works. So, yeah,
Yeah, no, it's a wild.
it's
Yeah,
tough.
it'll be interesting to see if we can find us maybe a solution to that. I guess it's sustainable in the sense that we keep doing it, like we
Yeah.
somehow find the time to just sit down and make these games and get them printed, and we're like, as long as someone's having a good time, it's a profit. I don't know.
That's where I land half of the time. And maybe it's not sustainable. I mean, I think a large majority of people making board games kind of on the like lower end are definitely doing other things. Like it's
Mm.
just such a necessary part of it. So yeah, I think a lot of it is just we're just finding the time whenever we can.
I don't know. I'm hoping that we come up with, there's got to be a solution to help especially marginalized creators find more of a like access or career or success in the industry. I think that's one of the biggest barriers, is that the people who do have success and reach and like a platform are straight white men. And so that's a lot of what's being made. It fits into that mold of what is already out there and selling. And so to come in with like a different perspective, and I
Yeah.
might not be as appealing for as a straight white man with a family would be. I'm just like,
Yeah, I mean it's a tried and true market, and you
mhm.
have to argue someone away from that, and it's the argument doesn't always go well. It makes sense to us though. There's a lot of money and just like business to be done with so many more people if you're open to just being real and representing real life.
Yeah. I mean, I am not a smart financial person by any means, but I do feel like I'm hopeful that the market does open up as more people, more marginalized people get involved and have more visibility in the hobby, where suddenly the market brings in more people, and the people who normally wouldn't consider buying games suddenly see themselves and are buying games, and then suddenly our games become more of a market success just
Yeah.
because we need to have, there's less of us, so we need more visibility to like reach, like to do as well. It's just, I don't know, we'll get there.
It's just work every day. That's all.
Oh, that sounds exhausting, but here for it. So you mentioned all the cool stuff you're doing. How can people follow, support you, get involved?
Yeah. I mean, you can basically find me everywhere at Akilaverse. And yeah, so I have some stuff on akilaverse.com if you want to just know more about what I do and what I'm available for. Because I also do, music videos for games and stuff like that. So yeah, there's that. And if you want to find out more information about my company, Colorway Game Labs and Rap Gods or Hoop Gods, yeah, you can find us at Colorway Game Labs on most of the socials, except for Twitter because there's stupid character limit. So it's Game Lab without the S. I don't want to talk about it.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's all I have. I super appreciate meeting you and you coming on and doing this and being your authentic self for people to, learn and experience. And you dropped all the knowledge.
Sweet. It really helped that I went to a Dodger Hall concert last night, so I'm like ready to beat me.
So, as a disclaimer, I just want to remind everyone, we are just a couple of queer folks. We do not speak for the entire LGBTQI plus community, or are we trying to? The best way to be an ally is just keep learning, listening, and remember, we're all just trying to get through this together. That's all I have. If you're listening, know that you're loved and perfect just the way you are. And until next time,
Bye.
Bye.